I never imagined that one harmless promise could erase the version of me I had spent 26 years building. If someone had told me that a single evening would slowly replace my jeans with flowing skirts, my rough habits with graceful manners, and my confidence as a boyfriend with the quiet expectations placed on a feminine social role, I would have laughed in their face. I wasn't searching for another identity. I wasn't curious about changing who I was. I thought I knew exactly where my future was headed. But life has a strange way of taking one tiny decision and turning it into a door that can never be closed again. Looking back now, I realize the biggest mistake wasn't saying yes. The biggest mistake was believing I could stop whenever I wanted. The first time Emily smiled at me, I felt like the luckiest man alive. She wasn't just beautiful. She noticed things nobody else did. She remembered little details about people. She could tell when I was nervous before I even spoke. Being with her felt easy, and within a year, everyone assumed we would eventually get married. Emily had one unusual hobby. She loved fashion history. Not expensive designer clothes or celebrity trends, but the psychology behind clothing. She believed outfits changed the way people behaved. She often told me that people didn't simply wear clothes. Clothes quietly taught people how to move, speak, and even think. I always smiled and nodded. I thought she was exaggerating. One rainy Saturday afternoon, while cleaning her apartment, she pulled out several old storage boxes filled with dresses, wigs, heels, makeup palettes, handbags, jewelry, and elegant accessories collected from theater productions and charity events. She laughed. I've always wondered something. What? What kind of woman would you become if nobody knew it was you? I burst into laughter. Absolutely not. She shrugged. I didn't ask if you wanted to. I just wondered. That sentence stayed in my head longer than I expected. Days passed. Then one evening she made me a deal. If you help me with a charity fashion experiment this weekend, I'll finally go camping with you next month. Camping had been my dream for over a year. What kind of experiment? Just helping people understand how appearance changes first impressions. That's all. She smiled. That's all. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I agreed. Saturday arrived. Emily led me into her spare room. On the bed sat a neat collection of clothing. A soft pastel blouse. A flowing skirt. Skin-tone tights. Simple flats. A shoulder-length brown wig. Natural-looking makeup. Nothing flashy. Nothing embarrassing. Everything looked ordinary. I thought this was just helping. It is. Why these? Because people won't learn anything if you look like a costume. I hesitated. She walked closer. If you're uncomfortable at any point, we stop. Her calm voice made it difficult to refuse. I nodded. 5 minutes later, I stood behind the bedroom door, holding clothes that suddenly felt much heavier than fabric should. I stared at myself in the mirror, wearing only the first layer. This was ridiculous. I almost changed back. But then I remembered the camping trip. I finished getting dressed. Emily knocked softly. Ready?
No.
She laughed. Good enough. When she entered, she didn't laugh. She didn't tease me. She quietly adjusted the collar, straightened the skirt, smoothed the wig, stepped back. There. I looked toward the mirror. For several long seconds, I didn't recognize myself. I didn't see a joke. I didn't see a parody. I simply saw someone unfamiliar. Emily handed me a pair of small earrings. They'll balance your face. I don't have pierced ears. They're magnetic. I reluctantly put them on. She smiled again. Now don't pose like yourself. What does that mean? You still look like you're trying to prove you're a man. I am. Exactly. She crossed the room and gently adjusted my shoulders. Relax. She lowered my arms. Stop taking up so much space. She slowed my breathing. Don't stomp. She demonstrated smaller steps. Let your hands move naturally. For 20 minutes, she taught me tiny habits I had never noticed women doing. None of it felt dramatic. But every small adjustment made the reflection look different. Then came the makeup. She used surprisingly little. A little foundation. Soft eyeliner. Natural lipstick. Nothing bold. When she finished, she handed me the mirror. I stared in complete silence. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't unbelievable. But it was enough that my own eyes needed a second to recognize me. Emily whispered, "Now comes the interesting part." "What?" "We're going shopping." My stomach dropped.
No.
"Yes. You said charity experiment. It starts outside." "I can't." "You promised." She wasn't forcing me. She simply reminded me of my own words. Somehow that made refusing even harder. The drive to the shopping district felt endless. I barely spoke. Every traffic light made me hope we would turn around. Instead, Emily parked. My hands were shaking. "I can't do this." She looked directly into my eyes. "Then let's go home." I blinked. "Really?" "Of course." I reached for the door handle. Then I stopped. Why was I stopping? I had exactly what I wanted. An easy escape. Yet something inside me whispered one dangerous sentence. "You've already come this far." I closed the door again. Emily didn't smile. She simply started walking. I followed. Every person we passed felt like they were staring. Every laugh sounded like it was about me. Every reflection in every shop window made my heart race. But something strange happened after 15 minutes. Nobody reacted. People smiled politely. One woman even held the door open for me. A cashier complimented my blouse. Another customer asked Emily if we were sisters. Sisters. I nearly froze. Emily answered naturally. "He's my younger sister." The conversation continued without anyone questioning it. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. Back in the car, I finally spoke. "They believed you." She nodded. Most people see what they expect to see. That sentence haunted me for days. A week later, I thought the experiment was over. Emily invited me over for dinner. Halfway through eating, she placed a small gift box beside my plate. "What's this?" Thank you." I opened it. Inside was the exact pair of flats I had worn during the experiment. I laughed nervously. "I don't need these." "I know. So, why buy them?" "Because I noticed something." "What?" "You stopped complaining halfway through the day." I got tired.
No.
She smiled gently. "You adapted." I couldn't answer. Because she was right. That night, I placed the box in the back of my closet. I told myself it would stay there forever. 3 days later, I opened the closet. Just to look. Nothing more. I picked up one shoe. Then the other. I don't know why. I slipped them on. Only for a minute. I stood there in complete silence, staring at my own reflection, wondering why something that had once felt impossible now felt strangely familiar. And that was the moment I unknowingly took the first real step toward becoming someone the world would eventually expect to see in a completely different role. I stood there much longer than I intended, wearing nothing except my usual clothes and those simple flats. They shouldn't have changed anything. They were just shoes. Yet the moment I looked down, my posture shifted almost automatically. My steps became quieter as I walked across my bedroom. I wasn't pretending. Nobody was watching. Emily wasn't there to correct me. Somehow my body remembered everything she had shown me. The realization made me pull the shoes off immediately. "What am I doing?" I whispered to myself. I shoved the box back into the closet and promised I wouldn't touch it again. That promise lasted 4 days. The following Friday, Emily called me. "I need one more favor." I laughed nervously. "I already know where this is going." "You actually don't." "What is it?" "I'm hosting a small gathering for some friends. They're all psychology students. We want to repeat the social perception experiment."
No.
"You haven't even heard the details." "I don't need to." She stayed quiet for a moment. "You can say no. I won't be upset." That made it harder. Emily never pressured me. She simply trusted me to decide. After a long silence, I sighed.
Fine.
"But only because it's you." "Thank you." Saturday evening arrived much faster than I wanted. This time the outfit waiting for me looked slightly different. A soft cream sweater, a dark knee-length skirt, black tights, low ankle boots, a delicate silver necklace. The clothes looked mature, comfortable, ordinary, nothing dramatic. Emily noticed me staring. "I picked something that matches your personality." You've thought about this way too much. She smiled. I pay attention. This time-changing felt less terrifying. That frightened me more than the first experiment. Last week I had needed 20 minutes to gather enough courage. Today it took 5. Emily noticed. You changed quicker. I just wanted to get it over with. Maybe. She helped fix the wig before stepping back. No heavy makeup today. She only used a little concealer, mascara, and lip tint. The result looked even more believable because it looked effortless. Then she handed me something unexpected. A small notebook. What's this? I want you to write down every assumption people make about you tonight. What do you mean? If someone offers to help you, write it down. If someone interrupts you differently than they interrupt men, write it down. If someone speaks to you differently, notice it. You think people will? I know they will. Her confidence made me nervous. Her apartment slowly filled with guests. 6 people arrived. 3 women. 3 men. Emily introduced everyone casually. This is Emma.
Emma.
That was apparently my name now. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked suspicious. They welcomed me naturally. One woman immediately complimented my boots. Another asked where I bought my sweater. One of the men stood up and offered me his chair without even thinking. I quietly wrote it in the notebook. Offer number 1. During dinner, something else happened. Whenever I spoke, people waited politely. But they also interrupted me more gently. When one of the men disagreed with my opinion, he smiled apologetically before explaining himself. If I had been sitting there as my normal self, I knew the conversation would have been louder, more competitive, more direct. Instead, everything felt softer. Emily caught my eye across the table. She knew I was noticing. Later that evening, everyone started playing board games. At one point, I accidentally dropped a handful of cards. Before I could bend down, 2 people were already helping me pick them up. Nobody had ever done that for me before. Small things. Tiny things. But there were dozens of them. By the end of the night, my notebook contained almost 3 pages of observations. Doors held open. Smiles. Compliments. People apologizing when walking past me. Conversations changing tone. Different expectations. Different reactions. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Emily asked, So? I looked down at the notebook. I don't know what to think. What surprised you most? I felt different. Because of the clothes?
No.
The people? She nodded. Exactly. That answer stayed with me all week. Monday morning, I walked into my office wearing my usual business clothes. Everything looked normal again, but something had changed inside my head. For the first time, I noticed how differently my coworkers behaved with one another. The men interrupted constantly. The women waited longer before speaking. People expected different things from different people without realizing it. I had never seen it before. Now I couldn't stop seeing it. Emily texted me that evening. Coffee? I replied yes. We met at our favorite cafe. She slid another small package across the table. I laughed. You really enjoy surprising me? Open it. Inside was a simple skincare set. Face wash. Moisturizer. Lip balm. I looked confused. I don't wear makeup every day. I know. So why this? Because taking care of yourself shouldn't depend on whether you're dressed up. I smiled. You sound like a commercial. She laughed. Maybe. I almost left the package on the table. Instead, I took it home. Over the next month, I actually started using it. Not because I wanted to look feminine, because my skin genuinely felt better. Then I started paying more attention to how I dressed normally. Cleaner shoes, better fitted shirts, neater hair. Emily never commented. She simply noticed. One Saturday, she invited me over again. This time, there were no clothes waiting. Instead, she placed several magazines across the coffee table. Fashion, body language, communication, color theory. I looked at her. I thought today was another experiment. It is. Where are the dresses? She smiled. Today we're learning. For 3 hours, we discussed why different colors changed perception, how posture influenced confidence, why certain fabrics created different impressions. It was fascinating. None of it felt like pretending anymore. It felt like understanding something I had ignored my entire life. As I prepared to leave, Emily stopped me. I have one last question. I turned around. If you had to attend an event tomorrow as Emma instead of yourself, could you do it? I answered immediately.
No.
She tilted her head. Are you sure? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because I wasn't actually sure anymore. She didn't push further. I'll ask again another day. 2 weeks later, that day arrived. Emily called me sounding unusually serious. My cousin canceled. What happened? She's sick. I'm sorry. There's a family engagement dinner tonight. I nodded. That sounds disappointing. It is. Then she took a deep breath. I told everyone my cousin would still be coming. I frowned. So, would you come instead? I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't laughing. You can't be serious. I am. They're your family. They've never met my cousin. I stared at her. You want me to spend an entire evening pretending to be someone else? Only if you choose to. This is different. I know. I could get caught. You could. I could embarrass you. You could. I looked at the floor. My heart was racing. This wasn't a psychology experiment anymore. This was stepping into a real social role. Not for 10 minutes. Not for a quick walk through a shopping center. For an entire evening surrounded by people who would believe I belonged there. I should have refused. Every logical thought told me to refuse. Instead, after nearly a full minute of silence, I heard myself say the one word that would quietly change everything again. Okay. That single answer set the stage for a night where I would no longer simply wear feminine clothes. For the first time, I would have to live inside a feminine social role from the moment I walked through the front door until the moment I left, and I had no idea that someone at that dinner was about to notice something about Emma that even I hadn't realized yet. I barely slept the night before the dinner. Every possible disaster played through my head. Someone would recognize me. Someone would ask questions I couldn't answer. Someone would notice my voice. Someone would laugh. By the time I arrived at Emily's apartment the next afternoon, I was convinced I should cancel. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and smiled gently. You're thinking about leaving. I am. You still can. I know. Neither of us moved. Finally, I stepped inside. I said I'd do it. This preparation felt completely different from the others. There wasn't any excitement. There wasn't any joking. Emily treated it like helping a close friend prepare for an important family event. She showed me the outfit she had chosen. A soft navy blue midi dress. A light cream cardigan. Simple pearl earrings. Low nude heels. A small crossbody handbag. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention. The goal wasn't to stand out. The goal was to blend in. This is what most people forget, Emily said as she handed me the dress. People who are trying too hard usually attract attention. People who are comfortable rarely do. I changed slowly. The dress felt surprisingly natural now, but the heels still made me nervous. Emily noticed immediately. You still walk like you're afraid of the floor. I am. She laughed. For tonight, don't think about walking in heels. Think about walking quietly. She spent almost half an hour helping me refine the little details. How to sit without thinking about it. How to reach for a glass naturally. How to greet relatives. How to keep conversations flowing without revealing too much. How to smile instead of rushing to answer. None of it felt fake anymore. It felt like learning another social language. When she finally handed me the mirror, I stared for a long moment. Emma looked comfortable. Not perfect. Not glamorous. Just like someone you might pass in a bookstore or see ordering coffee. Emily nodded. That's exactly right.
During the drive, she explained the plan.
My cousin's name is Hannah. She lives in another city. Most of my relatives have only seen a few old photos. How many people will be there? About 15. My stomach tightened. 15. You don't have to remember everyone's names. Just smile and let me lead the conversations. I nodded. The closer we got, the quieter I became. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand for a second. You don't have to prove anything. I'm terrified. I know. The house was already full of voices when we arrived. I could hear laughter before the front door even opened. Emily smiled. Ready?
No.
Good. She rang the bell. An older woman opened the door with a warm smile. There you are. You must be Hannah. She hugged me before I could even react. For one frozen second, I forgot how to breathe. Then I remembered Emily's advice. Relax.
Smile.
Follow their pace. I'm so happy to finally meet you, the woman said. You too, I answered softly. No suspicion. No awkward pause. She simply welcomed me inside. The evening began. Every introduction felt like another test. Emily's aunt complimented my cardigan. Her uncle asked about my drive. A younger cousin immediately started talking to me about books. Nobody questioned why I was there. Within 30 minutes, something unexpected happened. I stopped worrying about getting caught. I became more focused on listening. Emily had been right. People loved talking about themselves. If I asked thoughtful questions, they rarely asked difficult ones in return.
Dinner was served.
I found myself sitting between Emily's grandmother and one of her cousins. Her grandmother smiled kindly. You remind me of myself when I was younger. I almost laughed from nervousness. Instead, I simply thanked her. She reached across the table and gently adjusted a loose strand of my wig. The gesture caught me completely off guard. It felt oddly comforting. Nobody had ever done something so naturally affectionate toward me before. As the meal continued, I kept noticing tiny differences. People expected me to help carry dishes. They asked my opinion about decorations instead of sports. One of Emily's aunts complimented the way I folded my napkin. It sounded ridiculous. Yet nobody would ever have noticed something like that if I had attended as myself. Every interaction quietly reinforced the role I was playing. Halfway through dessert came the first unexpected challenge. Emily's little niece tugged on my sleeve. Can you come with me? I looked at Emily. She nodded. The little girl led me upstairs to her bedroom. I want to show you my drawings. For nearly 20 minutes she talked nonstop. Princesses, animals, dream houses, favorite colors. She never questioned who I was. Children notice honesty more than perfection. Because I listened carefully and answered sincerely, she trusted me immediately. When we came back downstairs, Emily's mother smiled. She never opens up that quickly. I wasn't sure what to say. Emily simply smiled at me. As the evening came to an end, something happened that neither of us expected. Emily's grandmother handed me a small wrapped package. Oh, I made this last winter, she said. I think it suits you. I slowly opened it. Inside was a delicate knitted scarf. Handmade. She had spent hours creating it. My throat tightened. I can't accept this. Nonsense. She smiled warmly. It belongs with someone who'll appreciate it. I looked at Emily. She gave me a tiny nod. I accepted the gift. The drive home was completely silent. When we finally reached Emily's apartment, neither of us got out immediately. She looked at me. So, I stared down at the scarf folded neatly in my lap. They treated me like family. They did. They weren't pretending.
No.
I ran my fingers across the soft fabric. This feels wrong.
Why?
Because none of it was real. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked quietly, were your conversations real? Yes. Was your kindness real? Yes. Did you enjoy listening to your niece? Yes. Did you appreciate your grandmother's gift? Yes. She smiled softly. Then maybe not everything was fake. That sentence stayed with me for days. The scarf remained on my desk at home. Every morning I looked at it before leaving for work. I couldn't throw it away. It meant something now. A week later, Emily invited me over again. This time there were no dresses waiting. Instead, she placed a notebook in front of me. The same notebook from our first social experiment. Read your first entry. I opened it. The first page described how terrified I had been walking into the shopping center. She turned to the final page. Now compare it to your last entry. I read the words slowly. Tonight, I forgot I was pretending for almost an hour. I froze. I had written that. I didn't even remember writing it. Emily watched quietly. You've changed. I know. The question is, she leaned forward. Are you changing because of the clothes? I looked down at the notebook.
No.
The people? I nodded. I think the expectations. She smiled. Exactly. A few days later, she called me with another invitation. This time it wasn't an experiment.
It wasn't family.
It wasn't even her idea. One of the women from that engagement dinner had invited Emma to join a weekend community volunteer group that met every Saturday morning.
They were expecting me, not my old self. Emma.
For the first time, people outside Emily's world wanted me there because of the role they believed I filled. I stared at my phone for nearly 5 minutes. If I accepted, this wouldn't be a single evening anymore. It would become part of my weekly life. And deep down, I already knew the answer I was about to give. I stared at the message on my phone for what felt like an hour. We'd love to have Hannah join us again this Saturday. Everyone enjoyed meeting her. Emily had forwarded it without adding a single comment. She wasn't persuading me. She wasn't even asking. She was simply letting me decide. I typed 3 different replies before deleting all of them. Every logical part of my mind screamed that this had gone far enough. The shopping trip had been harmless. The dinner had been temporary. But showing up again meant becoming someone people expected to see. It meant maintaining a social role instead of simply stepping into one. I finally called Emily. If I say yes, you don't have to. If I say yes, they're going to remember me. They probably will. And if I disappear later, they'll wonder why. I closed my eyes. This is getting complicated. She answered calmly. Only if you forget why you started. I started because of a camping trip. Emily laughed. I know. So how did I end up here? One choice at a time. Saturday morning arrived before I felt ready. This time I dressed almost entirely on my own. That realization hit me halfway through getting ready. A month ago, I hadn't even known how to put on a wig correctly. Now my hands moved naturally. I checked my reflection, adjusted the necklace, smoothed the skirt, applied light makeup exactly the way Emily had shown me. When I finished, Emily looked genuinely surprised. You barely needed me. I noticed. How does that make you feel? I thought about it. Honestly, a little scared. She nodded. That means you're paying attention. The volunteer group met at a neighborhood community center where they organized donated clothes, books, and food for local families. Nothing glamorous. Just ordinary people trying to help others. As soon as we walked inside, 3 women smiled and waved. Hannah, one of them, walked over and hugged me naturally. Another handed me a name tag without asking. Someone had already written my name. I wasn't pretending to belong anymore. People believed I already did. For the next 3 hours, I sorted donated children's books, packed food boxes, folded clothes, and chatted with people between tasks. Nobody questioned me. Nobody stared. Nobody made me feel unusual. Instead, they included me in every conversation. One woman asked for my opinion about organizing shelves. Another wanted advice on wrapping gift baskets. A retired teacher spent nearly 20 minutes telling me stories about her grandchildren. As I listened, I noticed something strange. I wasn't thinking about my appearance anymore. I was thinking about people. The role had become quieter. Less about clothing. More about interaction. On the drive home, Emily smiled. You forgot to check your reflection all morning. I blinked. You're right. The first shopping trip? I checked every window. The family dinner? Every mirror. And today? I thought back. I don't think I looked once. She nodded. Interesting. That evening I found myself opening the notebook again. Instead of writing about clothes, I wrote about conversations.
How people trusted me.
How easily strangers shared personal stories. How differently they listened. How I found myself listening more carefully too. Weeks passed. Saturday mornings slowly became part of my routine. My weekdays belonged to my normal life. My Saturdays belonged to Emma. At first, I kept those worlds completely separate. Then something unexpected happened. The habits started crossing over. At work, I interrupted people less. I listened longer before responding. I became more patient during meetings. Coworkers commented that I seemed calmer. One even asked if I had started meditating. I laughed. If only you knew. Emily noticed it too. You've become more comfortable with silence. I guess I have. You don't feel like you have to fill every conversation anymore. She was right. Months earlier, I always felt pressure to prove myself. Now I didn't. One Saturday after volunteering, everyone decided to have lunch together. We walked to a small cafe nearby. Halfway through the meal, one of the women looked at me. Hannah, we're planning a charity gala next month. Oh, we need someone to help greet guests. Another woman smiled. You'd be perfect. I nearly dropped my fork. Me? You're warm. You make people comfortable. You remember everyone's names. You always notice when someone feels left out. Each compliment caught me off guard. Those weren't comments about appearance. They were comments about behavior, about personality, about the role I had slowly grown into. I smiled awkwardly. I've never done anything like that. You'll learn. The conversation moved on. Mine didn't. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Emily poured us tea while I sat quietly at her kitchen table. They want me to greet guests. I heard. They think I can. They do. I don't know if they're right. Emily looked at me thoughtfully. When was the last time someone at work asked you to welcome new employees? I thought for a second. Last month. And before that, 2 months earlier. She smiled. You've been practicing these skills in both lives. I laughed softly. I never noticed. She handed me another cup. Confidence doesn't always arrive loudly. A week before the gala, the volunteer team met for planning. They handed me a schedule, a guest list, a seating chart. One of the organizers smiled. Hannah, can you also introduce our guest speaker? I froze. Emily looked at me. You don't have to. The organizer immediately apologized. I'm sorry. Only if you're comfortable. I looked around the room. Nobody was demanding anything. They simply trusted me. That trust felt heavier than fear. I took a slow breath. I'll do it. The room filled with smiles. For the next hour, they practiced introductions with me. How to welcome people. How to project warmth. How to keep everyone relaxed. I realized something that evening. Months earlier, I had been terrified of saying one sentence in public. Now people expected me to represent the entire event. The night before the gala, I barely slept. Not because I feared getting caught. Because I feared letting everyone down. That difference surprised me. Emily arrived early the next afternoon carrying a garment bag. This one's special. Inside hung an elegant emerald green dress. Simple, tasteful, beautiful without being extravagant. She smiled. I thought tonight deserved something memorable. As she helped me get ready, neither of us spoke much. The routine had become familiar. Foundation, mascara, soft lipstick, wig, jewelry, dress, heels. When she finished, she stepped back. For the first time, she didn't comment on how I looked. Instead, she said, "You look confident." Those words affected me far more than any compliment about appearance ever could. The gala hall slowly filled with guests, families, sponsors, community leaders, volunteers. I stood near the entrance greeting everyone with a smile. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for supporting us. The conversations flowed naturally. An hour passed, then another. Everything was going perfectly, until I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned around. Standing near the entrance was someone from my regular weekday life. A coworker. Someone who knew me well. For one terrifying second, our eyes met. He smiled politely, then looked away. He didn't recognize me, but he was walking directly toward the registration table, where my name badge clearly read, Hannah. And just as I felt relieved, another volunteer cheerfully called across the room in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Hannah, our guest speaker is ready. Everyone's waiting for you on stage. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. The room suddenly seemed much louder than it had a second earlier. Conversations blended together into a dull hum while my heartbeat became the only thing I could hear clearly. My coworker was only a few feet away. If he looked at me for another second, if he heard my voice, if he connected even one small detail, Everything could fall apart. I forced myself to smile. The volunteer beside me gently touched my arm. Hannah, they're ready. I nodded. Coming. As I walked toward the stage, I kept my eyes forward. Don't rush.
Don't panic.
Don't look back. Emily had repeated those words during every practice session. The stage lights made it impossible to see most of the audience. For the first time all evening, I was grateful for that. The microphone felt cold in my hands. I took one slow breath. Then another. Good evening, everyone. My voice came out softer than usual.
Steady.
Natural. I welcomed the guests, thanked the volunteers, introduced the guest speaker, and stepped aside. The entire introduction lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, the audience applauded politely. As I walked off the stage, my knees almost gave out. Emily met me near the curtain. You did it. I thought I was going to faint. You didn't. She handed me a glass of water. Your coworker? I don't know. Let's not assume the worst. The event continued for another 2 hours. By the end of the evening, we had helped raise more money than the organizers expected. Everyone celebrated.
People laughed.
Volunteers hugged each other. One of the organizers walked over carrying a small bouquet of flowers. Hannah. She smiled warmly. These are for you. For me? You welcomed every guest like they'd known you for years. Another volunteer nodded. You made everyone feel comfortable. A third person added, we hope you'll help organize next year's event too. Next year. That phrase echoed in my mind. People weren't inviting me back for another experiment. They were making long-term plans that included me. On the drive home, I stared quietly out the window. Emily didn't interrupt my thoughts. Finally, I spoke. I think something changed tonight. I know. It wasn't because of the dress.
No.
It wasn't because people believed I was Hannah. She glanced at me. What was it? They depended on me. Emily smiled. That's a very different feeling. For several days after the gala, I couldn't stop thinking about responsibility. At first, becoming Hannah had felt like acting.
Now people trusted me, expected me, included me.
That responsibility changed the experience completely. A week later, something happened that neither of us expected. I arrived at the community center on Saturday morning as usual. Everyone seemed unusually excited. One of the organizers waved me over. Hannah, we have news. What happened? Our community newsletter wants to feature volunteers next month. Oh, that's nice. She smiled wider. They asked if you'd be willing to do a short interview. I nearly dropped the box I was carrying. Interview. It'll only take 15 minutes. They'll ask why you volunteer. Another volunteer laughed. And they'll probably take a few pictures.
Pictures.
My smile disappeared. Emily immediately noticed. We'll think about it. The organizer nodded. Of course. No pressure. For the rest of the morning, I couldn't focus. Pictures meant permanence. Pictures meant evidence. Pictures meant that Hannah would exist somewhere outside memories. That evening, Emily and I sat quietly in her apartment. I can't do it. You don't have to. I've already gone farther than I ever imagined. I know. What would you do? She thought for a long moment. I'd ask myself one question. What? Why are you saying no? I answered immediately. Because I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Being discovered. She nodded. Anything else? I stayed silent. She waited. Finally, I admitted something I hadn't even admitted to myself. I'm also afraid. She didn't interrupt. That saying yes means Hannah becomes even more real. Emily looked at me carefully. And how does that make you feel? I don't know. That's an honest answer. The following week, I kept thinking about that conversation. Every morning before work, I looked at the handmade scarf hanging near my coat. Every Saturday, I packed food boxes with people who genuinely cared about each other. Somewhere between those two worlds, I had started measuring success differently. It wasn't about convincing people anymore. It was about connecting with them. Then came another surprise. One afternoon at work, my manager called me into his office.
We've noticed something.
My heart skipped. Had someone found out? You've become one of the best mentors on the team. I blinked.
What?
The new employees always ask for your help. Another manager smiled. You explain things patiently. We'd like you to lead the onboarding program next quarter. I walked out of the meeting completely stunned. The skills I had been practicing every weekend were quietly changing the person I was Monday through Friday. Not because I was pretending, because I had learned to listen, to observe, to encourage instead of compete. That evening I told Emily everything. She wasn't surprised. You've been practicing empathy for months. I thought I was practicing a role. Sometimes roles teach us things we didn't know we needed. A few days later, I made my decision about the newsletter. I agreed to the interview, with one condition: no photographs. The editor understood immediately. The interview took place in a quiet room at the community center. The questions were simple. What inspired you to volunteer? What have you learned? What keeps bringing you back? For every answer I gave, I realized I wasn't describing Hannah anymore. I was describing myself. When the interview ended, the editor smiled. You're exactly the kind of volunteer every community hopes for. Those words stayed with me all the way home. That Saturday evening, the volunteer group held a small celebration after finishing a major project. There was music, homemade food, laughter. As everyone talked, the retired teacher who had become one of my closest friends stood up and tapped her glass. I'd like to say something. The room became quiet. She looked toward me. When Hannah first joined us, I thought she was simply kind. She smiled. Now I realize she's the reason so many new volunteers stay. Everyone applauded. I felt my face grow warm. She continued. Kindness spreads. And you've reminded all of us of that. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I looked around the room. People were smiling at me. Not because of my appearance. Not because of the clothes I wore. Not because of a name. Because of how I treated them. That realization hit harder than anything that had happened before. Months earlier, I had feared being seen. Now I had become someone people genuinely appreciated. As Emily and I walked to the parking lot later that night, she smiled quietly. You know what tonight was? What? The moment they stopped seeing Hannah as a newcomer. I looked back at the brightly lit community center. So, what do they see now? She answered without hesitation. Someone who belongs. I thought that would be the biggest turning point of my journey. I was wrong. Because the very next Monday morning, as I walked into my office carrying my laptop and coffee, the coworker who had attended the charity gala stopped beside my desk, smiled thoughtfully, and said, Can I ask you a strange question? You remind me of someone I met recently, and I can't figure out why. I felt my grip tighten around my coffee cup. For a split second, I was certain everything was over. Every carefully separated part of my life seemed ready to collide in the middle of a normal Monday morning. My coworker leaned against my desk with a puzzled smile. I know this is going to sound weird. I forced a small laugh. Go ahead. I met someone at that charity gala last weekend. My heartbeat became painfully loud. Really? Yeah. He scratched the back of his neck. There was a volunteer there. I nodded slowly. Okay. You remind me of her. I smiled as naturally as I could.
How?
I honestly don't know. He laughed. It's probably just the way you listen. I blinked. My listening?
Yeah.
You both pause before answering. You both make eye contact when people are talking. You both remember little details. He shrugged. Maybe it's nothing. Then he walked away. I stood completely still. He hadn't recognized my face. He had recognized my behavior. That realization stayed with me the entire day. For months, I had assumed clothes created the biggest change. Instead, the habits I had learned, the patience, the quieter conversations, the attention to detail, had become part of me regardless of what I was wearing. That evening, I told Emily exactly what had happened. She smiled. I wondered when someone would notice. You expected this? Not the recognition. The consistency. What do you mean? She poured 2 cups of tea before answering. When people change only their appearance, the change disappears as soon as the clothes come off. She looked at me thoughtfully. You changed your communication. I sat quietly. She continued. You became more observant. You became more patient. You became more comfortable making other people feel comfortable. I nodded slowly. I don't know when that happened. It happened one conversation at a time. The following Saturday, the volunteer group held a planning meeting for a neighborhood cultural fair. Instead of assigning me simple tasks like sorting donations, they asked me to coordinate a welcome booth. I immediately shook my head. I've never organized anything like that. The organizer smiled. You already have. When? For months. You've been introducing new volunteers, helping visitors, answering questions. This is simply the next step. I wanted to refuse. Instead, I heard myself say, I'll try. For the next 3 weeks, I worked closely with volunteers I barely knew before. We planned schedules, organized supplies, prepared information packets, solved little problems together. I noticed something fascinating. People naturally shared responsibilities when they felt respected. Whenever disagreements appeared, I found myself calming conversations instead of taking sides. Emily watched me during one planning session. Afterward, she smiled. You didn't even notice.
What?
You naturally became the person everyone asked before making decisions. I looked back toward the group. She was right. Without anyone announcing it, people had started looking at me for reassurance. Not because I was the oldest, not because I was the loudest, simply because I listened before speaking. The cultural fair finally arrived. Hundreds of people visited throughout the day. Families, children, local artists, small business owners. The welcome booth stayed busy from morning until evening. I greeted visitors, answered questions, directed people to activities, introduced volunteers to one another. Around lunchtime, a nervous teenage volunteer approached me. This is my first event. I think I'm doing everything wrong. I smiled. I felt exactly like that my first day. You did. Oh, absolutely. She laughed with relief. By the end of the afternoon, she looked completely confident. Before leaving, she hugged me. Thank you. For what? You made today easy. That simple sentence stayed with me. Months ago, Emily had quietly done exactly the same thing for me. Now I was passing that feeling on to someone else. On the drive home, I looked out the window. I think I finally understand. Emily glanced over. What? The role isn't really about appearance. She smiled without saying anything. It's about how people experience you. She nodded. Now you've found the lesson. A few weeks later, another unexpected opportunity appeared. The community center announced they were starting a mentoring program for new volunteers. The coordinator called me. Hannah, we'd like you to mentor newcomers. I laughed. Are you sure? We're very sure. I accepted. Every Saturday after that, I met people who felt nervous, uncertain, or out of place. I remembered exactly how that felt. Instead of giving long speeches, I simply welcomed them the way others had welcomed me. Slowly, patiently, without pressure. Most of them relaxed within minutes. One afternoon, after everyone had gone home, Emily and I sat alone in the empty community hall. Sunlight streamed through the windows while volunteers folded the last few chairs. She looked around quietly. Do you remember the shopping trip? I laughed. I wanted to run away. You almost did. I know. She smiled. And now? I looked across the room where volunteers were waving goodbye. I don't come here because of the clothes anymore. Why do you come? Because these people matter. Emily looked genuinely proud. I hoped you'd say that. Several months passed. The seasons changed. The scarf Emily's grandmother had knitted now kept me warm during cold mornings. The volunteer group had become close friends. Work continued going well. For the first time in years, I felt balanced. Then one evening, Emily invited me to dinner. She seemed unusually nervous. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down. I've been thinking. That's usually dangerous. She laughed. Maybe. Then she became serious again. When all this started, I nodded. I thought I was running a social experiment. So did I. But somewhere along the way, she looked directly into my eyes. It stopped being an experiment. I didn't answer, because she was right. She continued quietly. I don't want you to think I was trying to change you. I know. I never wanted to replace who you were. You didn't. She smiled gently. You simply became more yourself. That sentence surprised me. I became myself? You stopped trying so hard to fit one definition. I sat silently for several moments. Finally, I smiled. I guess I did. She reached across the table and held my hand. No matter what name you use, no matter what clothes you're wearing, I hope you never lose the kindness you've found. I squeezed her hand. I won't. At least, I believed I wouldn't. But life still had one final surprise waiting. A week later, the community center announced its annual appreciation evening. Every volunteer would receive recognition for their contributions. The coordinator smiled at me. Hannah, we're giving you this year's Community Heart Award. I stared at her. For me? She nodded. The entire team voted.
My first instinct was to decline.
The second was to disappear. Because accepting that award meant standing in front of everyone who had come to know Hannah over the past year. And deep inside, I realized the biggest decision of my journey was no longer whether I could continue playing a role. It was whether I was finally ready to stand in front of all those people and tell them the truth about how that role had begun. I didn't answer the coordinator right away. The words Community Heart Award echoed in my mind long after the meeting ended. Everyone else celebrated. People hugged me. Several volunteers congratulated me before I had even processed what had happened. Emily stood quietly beside me. She didn't say a word until we were back in the car. So, I stared through the windshield. I don't deserve it. She smiled softly. That's exactly why you probably do. I shook my head. They think Hannah has always been this person. And I wasn't. Emily looked at me carefully. Weren't you? I sighed. I only became this way because of everything that happened. She nodded. Growth doesn't make kindness less real. For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about the ceremony. Every volunteer expected me to give a short speech. Every organizer expected me to accept the award. Every person there knew Hannah. Very few people truly knew how Hannah had entered their lives. I wasn't ashamed, but I also wasn't sure whether revealing the beginning of the story would help anyone. The evening before the ceremony, I visited Emily's apartment. We sat on the balcony with 2 cups of tea, watching the sun disappear behind the buildings. She finally asked the question I had been avoiding. What are you afraid of now? I smiled faintly. I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. No. I shook my head. I'm afraid of disappointing people. Emily leaned back in her chair. What if the truth doesn't disappoint them? I don't know. What if it inspires them? I looked down at my hands. I've spent so long protecting this story that I don't know what happens if I stop. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into a drawer beside her chair. She placed something on the table between us. The very first notebook. The one from the shopping experiment. I think it's time. I opened it slowly. The first page still made me smile. I'm convinced everyone is staring at me. The next pages described shaking hands. Awkward walks.
Fear.
Embarrassment. Tiny victories. Then the family dinner. The volunteer center. The gala. The mentoring program. Every turning point. Every lesson. Every fear that slowly became confidence. I reached the final blank page. Emily slid a pen toward me. Write one last entry. I thought for several minutes before putting the pen on the paper. I wrote slowly. I started this journey pretending to understand another perspective. Somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending and simply started listening. The clothes introduced me to new experiences, but the people taught me compassion. The biggest transformation wasn't what I wore. It was how I learned to see others and myself. I closed the notebook. Emily smiled. I think that's your speech. The following evening, the community hall looked completely different. The same room where we had packed food boxes and organized books was decorated with flowers, photographs from community events, and long tables filled with homemade meals. Volunteers laughed together. Families filled the room. Children ran between the tables. It felt less like an award ceremony and more like a family reunion. As people arrived, countless smiles greeted me. Hannah, we saved you a seat. Congratulations. You deserve this. Every compliment made me feel grateful and humbled. Halfway through the evening, the coordinator stepped onto the stage. She thanked every volunteer. She spoke about teamwork, about generosity, about the quiet people who changed communities without asking for recognition. Then she smiled toward me. This year's Community Heart Award goes to someone who reminded all of us that kindness is contagious.
She paused.
Someone who welcomed strangers as friends. Someone who listened before speaking. Someone who never looked for attention, yet somehow became impossible to imagine this community without. Hannah. The room filled with applause. I stood slowly. Emily squeezed my hand. You've got this. I walked toward the stage. For a brief second, I remembered that terrified boyfriend standing outside a shopping center, convinced his life would end if anyone looked at him. Now hundreds of eyes were on me. And I wasn't afraid. The coordinator handed me the award. It wasn't large, just a simple wooden plaque with my name engraved on it. But it represented every conversation, every Saturday morning, every act of kindness, every lesson I had learned. She smiled. Would you like to say a few words? I stepped to the microphone. The room became completely silent. I looked across the audience. Emily smiled reassuringly. Emily's grandmother sat in the front row wearing the same warm expression she had the night she gave me the handmade scarf. The teenage volunteer I had mentored waved excitedly. My coworkers weren't there. My ordinary weekday life wasn't there. Only the people who had walked beside Hannah. I took a deep breath. When I first came here, I smiled. I almost turned around before walking through the door. Several people laughed softly. I thought I had to be perfect. I thought people would notice every mistake. I thought I needed to prove I belonged. I looked around the room. I was wrong. The audience listened carefully. What I found instead was patience, friendship, and a community that welcomed someone they barely knew. I paused. The truth is, none of you changed me overnight. You changed me conversation by conversation, smile by smile, Saturday by Saturday. I held up the award. This doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone who made this place feel safe enough for people to grow. The room became incredibly quiet. Then I smiled. I've learned something that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. People remember how you make them feel far longer than they remember how you looked. A few people nodded. Some wiped away tears. So, whether you're meeting someone for the first time, welcoming a new volunteer, helping a nervous stranger, or simply listening to someone who's having a difficult day, never underestimate how much that moment can matter. Because one kind conversation can quietly change someone's entire direction. I looked toward Emily. Our lives don't always change because of huge decisions. Sometimes, they change because one person believes we're capable of becoming more than we believed ourselves. I smiled. Thank you. The applause lasted much longer than I expected. When I stepped off the stage, dozens of volunteers hugged me. The retired teacher smiled through tears. I told you that you belonged. The teenage volunteer laughed. You still make everything feel easy. Emily's grandmother wrapped the handmade scarf around my neck herself. It suits you even better now. I smiled. Thank you. As the evening ended and everyone slowly began leaving, Emily and I walked outside together. The air was cool. The parking lot was almost empty. She looked at me. So, no regrets. I looked back at the brightly lit community center one last time. I thought about the nervous boyfriend who had only agreed to wear different clothes because he wanted a camping trip. I thought about every tiny decision that followed. Every conversation. Every lesson. Every friendship. Every moment that quietly reshaped the way I understood people. Then I smiled. I started this journey believing I was only borrowing a different social role. I looked down at the award in my hands. But somewhere along the way, I realized the role never defined me. The kindness did. Emily slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the car. Neither of us spoke again. We didn't need to. Some stories end with a dramatic twist. Mine ended with something much quieter. A community. a deeper understanding of empathy, a relationship built on trust, and the realization that the strongest transformations are often the ones that begin with fear but end with compassion. When I think back to that first mirror now, I don't remember the dress. I don't remember the wig. I don't even remember how nervous I was. I remember the first smile that made me feel welcome, because that single moment led me to discover that the most meaningful role I could ever grow into wasn't simply a feminine social role. It was becoming someone who made other people feel seen, respected, and accepted, no matter who they were. And that is the version of myself I hope I never stop becoming.